This is every mistake you can make while building in Minecraft, starting with a circle. Building a circle in Minecraft is tough, and building a giant circle is even more difficult, especially when you're not able to see the circle that you're building all in one shot. And that's unfortunate what this Reddit user found out when they were building their giant circle, only to find out that it didn't actually connect. So if you want to stop yourself from getting into that situation, then there's plenty of pixel circle generators out there that you could use to then get the right idea for what you want to do. And plus, it's good to have these numbers in mind for when you're trying to prepare for how many blocks you need. It's a worthwhile step, and it'll save you the hassle of having to break all those blocks when you place them wrong. Stop using world edit in your Minecraft builds, or at least stop using it like this. One of the easiest things to forget about is that it copies relative to where you are. So if you type in the copy command and you're standing at this corner, hitting paste will give you some experimental architecture. So if you want to have it paste where you're going to be standing right at the doorway, then you should type in the copy command where you're also standing at that doorway. But at least World Edit has an undo feature for those of us who are just using vanilla commands or not as lucky. If you want to build a farm for your animals, you should keep this in mind first, since you wouldn't want to move over the animals while the farm was still waiting to be built. These animals do not play along very nice when you don't have the proper things to keep them in place. And unless you're looking to actively try and trap all of them like you're playing a game of lifesteal, you'd be better off building the place completely and then move them into that finished spot. After all, who wants to live in an unfinished house anyway? I'll book my reservation when the hotel's ready, thanks. Here's why your iron farm sucks. Since if you've ever had the issue of building an iron farm on the ground level and then just having a whole bunch of iron golems that are around, you'll know that it both throws off your spawn rates, and now you just got a couple of golems that are lying around, and if you try to kill them, they're gonna kill you. So the easiest solution for this? Just go into the sky. Up there you don't have to spawn proof, and that'll also give you more options for how you flow your items into a storage silo. This big build will be my life's work, if I live long enough to finish it. It's easy to get overzealous and then completely overcommit on what you're gonna build, and now have no time or resources to finish it. So if you want to prevent that, then you should take this old adage that comes from game development. Picture your ideal base, then cut that in half, and then again cut that scale in half, and now you got something that's manageable. That way you're able to put more time into the actual things that people will get to see. Like, scale is impressive, but having details where I can actually see them, that's a lot more manageable. Spawn chunks in Minecraft just got so much worse. What used to be 144 chunks for us to choose from is now just limited to 9. And because of that, if you want your farms to always be active, they're really limited to that small space, which could be a problem if you built your farms in the same place where you want to have a spawn town. So to fight against that, I would highly recommend considering planning where you want things to go before you actually place them down. Either incorporate them into a town, and then it's like a public utility, or if you want, go dig out underneath and make it something like a basement level to the industrial district. That way we're not sacrificing function for form. Here's why you need honeycomb if you're playing on an SMP. Because if you're like me and you've been playing Minecraft for years, it's easy to forget that now we're able to edit our signs when you right-click them. And whether you're the one accidentally right-clicking it, or one of your friends comes by and vandalizes it, we want to prevent both of those. And so in this case, if you take honeycomb and wax the sign, then it's no longer possible for someone to easily go in and edit the text. I no longer build with stone bricks, since a common mistake in Minecraft building is that you just get used to using the same block palette that you always use, and in that way, your worlds just feel similar. And when I'm not able to tell the difference between this house or one that I built a few years ago, I feel like it's time to expand outside your comfort zone and start to mix with other block palettes. And so, setting a fun challenge for yourself could be a good way to do this. Like, maybe you don't use any wood blocks inside of your build, or you go to the nether and use exclusively blocks that you can find there. In my survival world, I recently did a challenge where I could only use blocks that I got inside of a 1x1 chunk, and a lot of the blocks that I ended up using were pretty unorthodox. Will I use all of them again? Probably not, but now that I know that I have some good ones, now I at least have something to mix in other than just those same stone bricks. Here's how you can solve one of the most common building mistakes in Minecraft in just 7 seconds. Instead of building your walls where they look flat, you can instead just offset some of the blocks for the foundation, and now you have a lot more depth to your build. Give your roof an overhang instead of having it end at the wall, or make your glass blocks into glass panes. And just those simple tricks are all that you need to make your build a lot more interesting off the rip. Minecraft is a game made of cubes, but your build shouldn't look like one. So one of the quickest ways that you can level up your builds is by just taking different simple shapes and adding them together. Now your house doesn't look like you just used the fill command on it. If I never see another slab again, it'll be too soon, because we probably all know someone who's built their house with way too many details. And you can only use so much detail before it distracts from the entirety of what you're trying to make. Oftentimes, less is more in these cases. And I think you'll find that by having the confidence to just use a little detail and that's it, will make the places where you did use it stick stick out a lot better than just having it be a mess here. Plains biomes are boring. Now, don't get me wrong, they're intentionally supposed to be one of the easiest biomes to build on, that's why they're so flat, but it's also pretty limiting to get used to seeing your same build built in the same place. So venturing out of your comfort zone and finding that you can build inside of other biomes is a great way to fall in love with building in Minecraft again. Not only will you have different resources to choose from, but the differences in the world height and in the biome color map for things like grass and leaves will also get you to explore different block colors. Who knows, you might just find a new favorite spot. Picture this, you start building your new base, you collect all the resources to do it, start laying together the frame, finally you're placing the last blocks in the roof, only to realize you don't like any of it. And that's exactly why you shouldn't settle for the first design that you take for the build. The best time to mess up is as early as possible. Experiment, use wool or other cheap blocks that you can use to decorate the different areas of the frame. And then, when you're able to visualize it easier, now you can commit to the build and get something that you're actually satisfied with. Glass panes can be a real pain for your build. Now, I get it, it's not exactly appealing to have an empty space on your wall, and no one wants to live in a windowless box, so oftentimes we fill that empty space with glass windows. But at a certain point, it just doesn't look good when you have this many windows. Not to mention the lack of privacy. So instead, you'd be better off limiting the number of windows that you use, and finding different ways that you can decorate those walls instead of just another thin glass. When you think of a roof in Minecraft, you're often thinking of something built out of stairs. And because not every block can be crafted into stairs, that usually limits us on what we use. So you might be happy to know that you can actually use other blocks to great effect in the same way. And whether you use slabs or even just full blocks instead, I think you can quickly find out that this works perfectly well for your roof. But if you are using full blocks, you are going to have to make the scale bigger to compensate for it. But that also makes your base more impressive at the same time. I see it as a win-win if you're ready for it. Minecraft has a lot of iconic debates, whether that's pronouncing it Herobrine or Herobrine, planting your sugarcane on dirt or sand, and now I've got to ask you, do you build your roof with an odd or even number of blocks? While I won't distinguish between which one's better, I will say that it's good to know which one you plan on doing before you lay out your first block. Because while we personally like connecting it up to an odd number of blocks so that you have a single point to the top of your roof, even numbers can look great as well. And in fact, your roof doesn't even have to be slanted like this in the first place. But if you're gonna do that, you should figure it out before you place down the first block. One of the best things you can do when building your world is thinking about world building. And so if you think about the historical purpose for why your build is that way, it'll be a lot easier to know what theme you're going for. Like if you happen to build next to the ocean, then maybe having it be more of a fisherman village makes sense. Or if you build up in the sky, then making it more futuristic would fit that better. But the sooner that you figure out that theme, the better it is to stick with it and not try to break outside too much. If you're building a giant doorway, don't just settle for a regular door block. It just doesn't work well with the scale at all. Instead, finding other solutions to keep mobs out could be a lot more beneficial. Whether that's string under carpets, trapdoors, or even rails, there's plenty of ways to keep mobs at bay without having to use the most basic. And that also means you don't have to get an engineering degree in redstone to figure out how to make something of this scale, both of which I like. I like the blocks that we picked for this build, but I don't like how we built them. Building in layers just looks ugly. No one wants to live inside of a sandwich. So instead, you'd be much better off considering how you can mix the blocks more naturally into different roles in the build. One of the easiest ways to do this is when you're picking out your block palette, consider which block you're going to use for the foundation, which block you're going to use for the walls, which block you're going to use for the supports, and so on. And now you're not building in layers, but you're building together. Looks so much nicer. Stop using one material for your floors, because while it's easy to build yourself a wood floor, an even easier way to make that wood floor look better is just by mixing in a pattern like this. And if we instead mix in stripped logs along with our planks, now it becomes a lot more unique. Or you could do my personal favorite of using blocks like blast furnaces and furnaces for their top texture on the floor. Now you got secret places to stash items, and you got a unique floor design. It's pretty cool if you got the cobblestone. You ever place a carpet in your build and it just feels off? Like it's a little too flat. Instead, do what Blue Nerd lays out and mix in regular wool blocks and the carpet on top of them to look more like folds inside of the carpet blocks. Granted, it looks like a rug you're gonna trip over, but it's better than looking like you just covered up a hidden basement. I like this a lot better. I don't like building balconies like this in Minecraft, since if you use slabs on top of blocks to keep it safe for players, then they're barely able to see over them. So instead, we can make this look a lot better while also making it shorter at the same point. Using something like a lectern or an anvil and then putting a trapdoor on top, it'll still be safe, and it's a lot smaller of a footprint for you to see over. Building a full staircase in your build takes up a lot of room, and so usually we like to have a floating staircase so that you have a bit more of an option. But what do you put underneath those stairs when you have just an empty space? Well, I wouldn't ask the Dursleys, but consider adding in hidden storage to tuck along this wall. Or take after what Blue Nerd does here and mix in bookshelves as a way to hide our stairs while still looking intentional. Stop building your house on a flat ground. I know, it's the easiest way to build something, but it also really makes your build stick out like a sore thumb. Instead, the better solution may be to build your house a few blocks off the ground, and then you can terraform the terrain so that it blends naturally up into your base. And now it actually looks like you're living on a house on a hill, instead of just cutting off the top of the hill and placing a house there. Here's why your block palette might be hurting your Minecraft builds. Since if you're only thinking of using one block for the walls, then when you have different portions of your house like this, it's gonna look very awkward to have them all just muddled together. And instead, you'd be better off coloring different wall blocks for different parts of the house. That helps with getting some depth into your build, and also makes it a lot easier to read how it is visually. And in this example from Green, I like mixing together the sandstone and the bricks to separate off of that regular white background. Just feels a lot more like a house than a compound. Your Minecraft windows are boring, but they don't have to be. Since if you were to take those same glass panes that you were already using and dye some of them, then you can get a really unique shading to your builds. And I particularly like mixing together gray stained glass panes into our actual white ones to give it those same kind of streaks that the glass pane has in its actual texture. If you've only got one water bucket, don't sweat it. You can still make an infinite water source. Since a simple way to do this is just to dig out a T-shape like so, place one block, and then pour your water bucket out like this user does. And then once it's flowing into your new T-shape, you can use a piece of bone meal to create seagrass, and that new seagrass will turn all of the flowing water into a water source block, which can be insanely helpful in something like Skyblock, where the amount of resources that you have is pretty limited. And then after we got those extra water sources, we can just pull from the middle, because now we got an infinite water source. And we did it all without an ocean or a second bucket, both of which I think is pretty impressive. The Ender Dragon is a destructive boss. Truly, unless the block is native to the end, the odds are that it's getting destroyed. And while it makes sense that the dragon could break down your cobblestone tower, why are ender chests on that list? After all, they're made of obsidian, so the logic would figure these are pretty safe. But as you can see when we put these next to the dragon, that's just not true. But hey, at least if she breaks this chest, your items are still well and good up in the cloud. Normally when I start up a new world, I'm mining 11 pieces of cobblestone, 3 for my pickaxe and 8 for a furnace, which is a nice exercise in mental math, but that's about all it's good for. Since really when you can, you should be using things like campfires instead of furnaces. Now granted, they cook things much slower than a furnace, but they can also smelt up an infinite amount of food without having to refuel. And not to mention that if you break the campfire, you'll get all the 3 logs that you put into it back as charcoal. So even if you don't use it, you essentially found a faster way to get charcoal than having to smelt it, which could be great for things like torches or putting it in the furnace when you have ore to smelt. That way you'll be using it when it's most useful. Picture this, you take the time to build your perfect mob farm, get all the spawning rates right, and then you ruin it by adding in a viewing window. Don't get me wrong, it's an honest mistake. I also want to see if it's working properly. But ever since 1.18, even just that little bit of light level that seeps in through the glass can block all of the hostile mobs from spawning. So to fix this problem, you should be using the newer tinted glass instead. That way we turn this worrisome window into the one-way glass that you need to do the trick. If your villagers keep escaping from your trading hall, you need to use honey blocks. Since, silly as it may seem, no mob's able to jump off of a honey block to get enough height, meaning by just tucking a couple of these inside your trading hall, your villagers won't be able to escape anytime soon. And then for some added defense, you can even add in honey blocks around them so that mobs like zombies and more importantly baby zombies can't even jump in to attack them, keeping them safe and in place, both of which are important. What you might notice is that only big spenders are building their nether portals with the 4 corners, since as we all know, it's unnecessary. I mean, even the Yogscast taught us that. Plus, it's not like obsidian can be easily farmed anyway, so if you're doing this, you're really just wasting time in 2 different ways, both in mining the obsidian and in spending the extra time to lay out those 4 blocks. So really, the only time you should see a nether portal built in this layout should be when you go through the nether and it generates over there. But in any other case, I'd recommend putting that 4 extra obsidian into an enchanting table or something. This cave looks safe, but it's actually stupid, because this cave is also safe, and it took a lot less torches. See, since the changes in 1.18 to mob spawning, they'll only ever spawn down here in complete darkness, which is a big change from when they used to spawn in light levels up to 7. And honestly, I have a bad habit of doing this too. It just feels safer when there's more light. But if you're low on resources, just know that you can take this easy out, and it's not going to come back to bite you in any way. As soon as you start to get resources that you need to smelt, you should not be wasting time individually putting them into different furnaces. Instead, with the help of the chest boat, we're able to position one of these on top of a bed of hoppers so that it'll will evenly disperse all of our items across all of these different furnaces. And just like that, we're smelting 9 times faster than we would in a regular smelter. Change them out for blast furnaces, it goes up to 18 times faster. And then by doing something like Puffing Fish HQ shows off in this design, we can have another chest minecart go around the outside and fill up all of our furnaces with fuel. And don't worry, they store the XP, so when you eventually go through and break all these furnaces, you're still gonna get the rewards that you want. There's really no downside to doing this. Laying out a redstone contraption can be tough work. And nothing kills the pride of putting in all that hard work just to have it be broken because you placed it on a regular ground block. You see, if you're doing your redstone on a naturally occurring block, then it's just going to be a recipe for confusion. So instead, just color code your contraption, which in turn makes the redstone even easier to fix, as now you can just look at one part instead of the whole thing. Instead of using chests, use barrels instead. Since for one, they're cheaper to craft, they cost you 1 less plank for each recipe, and they're also great for small bases, since even if you have a solid block on top of them, you're still able to open them up. And while we can't double their size like we would a regular chest, it's also important to note that if you get a lot of these, they aren't rendered as entities like the rest of the chests, so they cause a lot less lag if you build yourself a barrel monster instead of a chest monster. Whether you're playing on easy or hard mode, mob proofing is an essential chore on your to-do list. And while light level can work, that isn't as much of an option in the nether. So if you're trying to get piglins to stop spawning in your travel tunnels or next to your fortress farm, then an easy to get solution is a moss carpet. Now initially, it might seem ridiculous to try and put vegetation next to lava, but apparently, moss carpet doesn't burn, making it pretty ideal for the lava landscape. Though I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that even though this doesn't burn next to lava, flowing lava will still break these the same as flowing water. But as long as you keep that in mind, you'll be safe. Or safer, at least. If your copper looks like this, I can tell you why it's not oxidizing. Since the way that it's coated, copper blocks need at least 4 blocks between them to oxidize at max speed. And if you have the blocks placed any closer together, it's gonna take much longer, especially if they're touching. So instead, a pattern like this is gonna be the quickest way to do it, helping you to build that Statue of Liberty replica and still get it finished within your own lifetime. Sometimes it's the textures you least expect that work out the best, and I think there's something kind of beautiful about that. Like if you were gonna build out your wooden floor, you'd probably never think to use beehives. But it turns out these buzzing blocks can work surprisingly well for a tile pattern. So while it might not always be your first pick, I think this goes to show that the unexpected might just work out. All it takes is a different angle. Everyone's seen this before, the classic cobblestone generator. But while it's iconic, it's not exactly the fastest. So if you're looking for a better return on your skyblock profits, this format might be worth a try. With this altar-shaped setup, we not only get 1 block per cycle, but we get 8 instead. And folks, that'll let us walk the perimeter and essentially mine around the clock, without having any lulls in the cycle. Or hey, you could even enlist a couple of friends and have this work at full capacity on the multiplayer server. Nothing adds to the panic of dying in Minecraft quite like seeing this show up on your screen. So to prevent that, even though it might look nice to have your bed decorated like this, you really shouldn't build any blocks that could obstruct you from spawning. And if you're playing an older version such as 1.12 and before, then you really gotta watch out for this sort of change. All it takes is just a bit of glass or a snow golem around your bed to mean that you'll never respawn there again. Speaking of putting glass underwater, this design is great for lighting up the dark depths. See, with a column of glass placed from the seabed to the surface, you can create a skylight of some sorts to light up your underwater world. And if you don't have the time to smelt up the glass, then you should know that sugarcane could also be used as an alternative. If you build your water elevators like this, you're doing it wrong. Instead, using item frames, we can make it accessible from all sides, instead of this one using signs. And hey, it's a lot less obtrusive too, especially if you use map art as a disguise. Now, you can't use channeling unless you hit a mob, but these item frames count as a mob. So with one of these, we can place it down and have our own pocket solution for fixing our oxidized copper, which allows us to turn back time, in a way. And hey, it can also provide a solution for converting mobs with lightning without having to hit them with a lightning strike. And that way your brown mushroom doesn't just die on the spot. This is glass, and this is shattered glass, or so it looks like. See, with the Caves and Cliffs addition to glow lichen, this user pointed out that by placing some on the outside of a glass block, you can make it look shattered like so. So if you want to make your ruined builds look, well, ruined, this sells the look a lot more than a clean piece of glass. Minecraft has plenty of foodstuffs to go around, but shockingly few can be used for decoration, and I think that's a raw deal. So to solve your stew situation, this composter might be the solution. Now, sure, when it's empty, it doesn't look like much, but fill it up to the brim and put it over a campfire, and now you got a feast fit for the village. And I think it's little details like this that transform your campsite into something worth watching, instead of just a bed and a chest. Bookshelves seem like a nice decoration, but they can very quickly get repetitive, and oftentimes that texture is just reserved for your level 30 enchantment room. But this might be a way to break up that sameness. Apparently, the loom texture when placed side by side makes for a pretty convincing empty bookshelf block. So while it's a far cry from the variated textures we see in something like Vanilla Tweaks, I do think it's a step in the right direction. Even though Minecraft doesn't abide by the rules of gravity, there's still an expectation that your build should. And almost always, if something looks unsupported, it looks out of place. So you won't normally see a set of stairs along the side of your building. But with this simple touch, you can make it happen. By just using trapdoors like so, we can add a convincing railing to the build. And that alone is going to make it look so much better than the competition, trust me. Hiding a door behind a painting has to be the oldest trick in the book. And at this point, these aren't fooling anyone except for the newest of players. So to take this worthless secret entrance and bump it up, all we need are some hitboxes. And if you lay out a trapdoor here or a slab there, these become a lot harder to find, keeping your stuff safe for another day. Obviously, enchanting your gear in Minecraft is an absolute necessity. But while there are definitely benefits to the enchantment room, one of them is not going to be the look. So to fix that, how about making an enchantment room that actually reveals itself through the floor? Before we trigger this redstone input, you can clearly see that the top texture of the bookshelves matches pretty well with the oak wooden planks. And then when you're ready to get efficiency 5 on your pickaxe, all you gotta do is flip this and boom, your enchantment room is ready for you to use. And then after you're done with all your work, all you gotta do is flip this switch again and poof, it's gone in an instant. Instead of using cobwebs or barbed wire, try this. Because, as this user pointed out, dead brain coral matches the look even better. And even if it doesn't slow down any intruders like a cobweb would, if you make the wall tall enough that you can't jump over it, it'll still look the part. Fences and walls are commonplace in any Minecraft build you visit, and while they're nice enough blocks to use, I think we need to do better. But luckily on Bedrock, that solution is super simple. Over here, it's possible to put different buttons on top of the posts. And while we can't do the same on Java, a bonus tip for there is that by adding string on top of walls, you can make them into columns when we choose to, both of which are useful details. When you're playing Minecraft long enough, then misclicks are sure to happen. And while most of the time they're just no harm, no foul, if you're holding around an axe all the time, then you could cause some damage. I have a bad habit of doing this every time I try to open up a door with an axe. I'll always just hit the logs that are on either side of it. So to save yourself from this kind of embarrassing mistake in the future, just go around your world holding some other tool in your hand. And then you can just save your axe for when it's actually useful. Unlike what Bob Ross told you, your mistakes aren't always going to be happy accidents. And believe me, nothing makes a mistake worse than having to waste even more time trying to fix it. So to get the blemish off your plate in a faster manner, why don't we just use the water for cleanup? Normally, these things are like oil. They don't mix well with water. But for our purposes, we can use that to our advantage. That way you get the resources back faster, and you'll be able to start at square one once again without even skipping a beat. Minecart roller coasters are great, but they sure are expensive. And you'll see as much when you try to get this minecart trail out of your mine and up into the surface. That's a lot of blocks going up. But instead, we can do this with a bubble column and a bit of scaffolding. Sure enough, the minecart and the person riding it are counted as an entity, meaning that if we have our roller coaster deposit them into a bubble column like so, both will shoot right up to the top, and then if we have a scaffolding above with a rail on top, we can catch us both and essentially make for the cheapest and quickest minecart elevator. Because trust me, an infinite water source is a lot easier to come by than an infinite gold source. Both possible, but I'd rather stick with the ocean than the nether. Stop using redstone dust in your builds, because the truth is that this is one of the lackiest redstone components in the game, especially when you continue to power it off and on. And in lieu of that, you'll find it much more efficient to use powered or activator rails instead, which, there you go, costs the same amount of redstone. And at least for that part, it should be an easy transition to make, as long as you got a gold farm. Look, when you're playing in harder difficulties, then a lot of times spawners seem like more trouble than they're worth. But then the problem becomes after I've gone through all of that, when I want to actually make a farm, I have to go find a new spawner. Even though in the moment it might be a hassle to go in and deactivate one of these spawners on the spot, the EXP and items that you're going to get after the fact definitely make up for it. So in the future, let's just try to think about the long term and maybe use torches for these going forward. If you're trying to clear out a bunch of deep slate, it's going to be a real hassle on your tools. But if you head down into the deep dark with a couple of blocks of moss and bone meal, then we can do it much faster and cheaper. Simply place down the moss, use bone meal to convert the deep slate, and then we can instantly mine that moss with something as low tier as a stone hoe, which really is a win-win-win situation. I mean, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's even faster faster than using a regular Efficiency 5 netherite pickaxe, since there's no way in the regular game to instant mine deep slate, which with all that considered, really makes the solution a no-brainer. Snow golems melt in the desert. That's not much of a surprise, even Frosty the Snowman could have told you that. But what you might be surprised to know is that if you use a fire resistance potion, that'll allow your snow golems to survive in hot climates. And yes, that even includes the nether, as silly as it might seem. So if you have a couple of these lying around after a piglin bartering, you could set up a couple of snow golems, splash them with this, and use those to help you eviscerate through that blaze spawner. Just get ready for the rude awakening when the potion effect wears off, and you're left with nothing more than a pile of snowballs in front of you. I guess nothing good ever lasts, huh? Lighting up caves while you're mining is obviously a good idea, but in specific situations, you might be placing your torches wrong. Because obviously, the worst scenario that we want to avoid is that you place your torches on the ground, you go to mine that diamond ore, and all of a sudden, all this water splashes into your face. Just like that, your torches are wiped clean, and now you can't see your way back up to the surface. Rather, if you place your torches on the walls, then you can avoid a lot of that same hassle. If you've ever built with blocks that have an orientation, you're well aware that they're annoying to replace mid-air. So to fix that, we should mention that it's actually possible to just double-click the left-click and the right-click button at the same time, and as long as you instantly mine the block, you'll be able to change the rotation without placing any support blocks for it, which can be great for correcting your mistakes that you placed on that stairs for the roof, or even just for rotating your bamboo right so that it looks good for the window. And as long as you got the right efficiency tools to do this, it'll save you a lot of time. When you start trying to work your way through the villager trading market, then you definitely gotta be looking out for this. Because sure, it's definitely cool to re-roll your villager constantly to try and get the best one, but if you don't convert the villager to a zombie and then change it back right after, then you're just wasting some good trades. If you're not looking to get the hero of the village effect all the time, this is definitely a way to save a couple of your emeralds on your next book. Instead of planting your crops outside, you should tuck them down in a cave. Now I know, crops need light and sunshine and all that, but that's actually the point. Since if you were to plant your crop farm underneath a redstone lamp like this, then when it's time to harvest, all you gotta do is flip a lever on that switch, and all of the crops will be harvested in an instant. At which point, you can turn back on the light, plant all your crops, and get ready to do the same again next week. Usually, we change the color of beacon beams by using full glass blocks, which does work, but it's too expensive. Or rather, it's gonna look expensive when you compare it to this. See, by using colorful glass panes, you can get the same effect. And considering we get 16 glass panes per 6 glass blocks, that gives us 16 opportunities to change the color of your beacon instead of the 6 that we just had. And plus, you can even hide those stained glass panes inside of the beacon beam, which I'd argue looks even better than the original option, meaning that in more ways than one, this should be the way that you're dyeing your beacons going forward. By this point, we're all plenty familiar with the grass block texture, which means using this in a build can often feel tired, or at the very least, underwhelming. But fortunately, we've got some blocks in recent years to help break up that monotony. Like, why not add a strip of moss to the green in your yard to make it look mowed? Or even just mixing in some green concrete powder here and there can help to texture those paths we've seen hundreds of times before. And believe me, any little bit helps. Instead of a torch this size, why not try the supersized one? With the same materials that we'd use to craft a regular torch, we can make ourselves one of these campfire mega torches. And then if we add around signs around the perimeter, we've got something that's ready to be set up at your next base. So if you're looking for a design that's not going to break the bank, but also looks like you actually care about your build, I think this is a happy medium. If you're planting sugarcane next to your crops, it doesn't always blend well. But if you mix in podzol next to your farmland, that texture will blend a lot nicer when you're placing it next to the water source. And that way we don't have that ugly dehydrated dirt look, distracting from what could have been a really pretty farm. And in my eyes, I'm glad this fixes that. If you build your cow farm like this, you're doing it inefficiently. And instead what you should do is you should bait your cows into a 1x1 hole like this, with a hopper and a chest underneath them. So that, when you continuously breed them, that entity cramming limit's gonna kick in, and after you have 24 cows in your farm, eventually it'll start to kill off the other cows, and you'll have a fully functional automatic farm without even needing that big of a footprint. This TNT trap works, but we can do so much better, because by just adding 5 iron to the base of that TNT, we got ourselves a TNT minecart that does the job instantaneously. Since by mixing together TNT minecarts with powered rails, we can not only explode our victim before they know what's going on, but we can also pack an absurd amount of TNT into that one rail, making our machine a lot deadlier without actually having to scale up the size. Ender chests are great for storing your stuff, but how much stuff you store is something you should consider. Since while you could easily just use the 27 slots that come built in, if you were to fill up each of those slots with a different candy-colored shulker box, then each of those slots gets multiplied by another 27 item slots. Once you go through and name all of these in an anvil, you basically won't need a storage system at home, because now you'll have your entire gear saved up in the cloud, which can be great for when when you want to go build something new far away without making constant trips back to the restock farm. Infinite water sources are helpful, but ugly. But this should do the job well enough. It's a well. I don't know if that was clear. And here it looks like just one block of water, but when you pull from the inside, it'll refill from the water sources that we hit on the stairs from the side, letting it look minimalistic without minimizing the function. Stop using your obsidian for blast chambers. Instead, use waterlogged blocks. Since 1.19 lets us now waterlog our leaves and mangrove roots, that water inside will keep these from exploding. And while this does work with any kind of waterlogged block, I would recommend using leaves instead, since at least that way, the water's self-contained, it's not going to flow out of the block, which could be a problem if you're using something like stairs instead. I am a huge proponent about lighting up your builds, but while it's a good idea to light up, you should never be too obvious about it. What I mean by that is that lighting should be incorporated into your build. For example, glowstone isn't always a looker out in the open, but once you start hiding it behind some shrubbery or some other kind of transparent block, then you can have lighting and you don't have to see it out in the open. Plus, you can play with it to give really cool atmosphere to your builds. It's another skill entirely to be able to hide your lighting well, and it's something that I'd encourage all of you to be mindful of. Building a house in the nether or the end is a cute idea, but as soon as you start placing a bed there, we gotta shut the whole operation down. Because even if you double right click while placing that very bed down, boom, whole place goes up in smoke, and all of a sudden it's up to your will for the loved ones. They might seem innocent, but treat these things very carefully in different dimensions. And hey, same goes for a respawn anchor in the overworld. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?